I disagree with everything he said, that we need to fund Ukraine and Israel at the same time.
I'm just glad you're here to listen to it.
Has the FAA approved any requests to use airports to house illegal foreign nationals?
So I'm going to answer that if you'll let me.
How does that promote safety or utility or efficiency in these airports?
I think you're out of my area of expertise. I'm not familiar with that, sir.
Would you like to correct that answer, or is that the answer you want to stick by?
The official position is that we don't have a position.
Is the COVID emergency over? How many days a week do the employees have to show up in a 2-week work period?
Tiger team, Fox guarding the hen house kind of situation.
What the members up here, what the hell's a live environment? Taylor Swift flying to the Super Bowl in her supersonic jet.
I'm not sure that Taylor Swift flies supersonic.
I mean, I played in the NFL, and if they'd let us be our own referees.
Stafford to my right keeps screwing up this list. I've had enough of this, and so we're going to go ahead and fire him.
To make sure that you're all there.
Maintaining our gold standard of aviation safety is in the vital interest of the United States and should be an urgent national priority. But the only guaranteed gold standard is that what got us there yesterday is not going to be what keeps us there tomorrow. In the past year, and as I noted, we've seen several aircraft manufacturing defects, aircraft engine fires, a whole passenger airframe destroyed by fire, near misses at our airports, ramp worker deaths, pilot mental health issues, general aviation accidents, poor airline customer service, especially for disabled passengers, and other challenges. I now recognize Ranking Member Cohen for 5 minutes for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to say I disagree with everything he said, that we need to fund Ukraine and Israel at the same time.
I'm just glad you're here to listen to it. In 2020, Congress passed the Aircraft Certification, Safety, and Accountability Act in response to design flaws which contributed to the crashes of 2 Boeing 737 MAX aircraft. One of the provisions of that bill requires aircraft manufacturers to implement safety management systems. Given what you've learned so far from the Alaska Airlines Flight 1282 incident and challenges that Boeing's had with quality control, is the FAA considering further action with SMS requirements and for aircraft part suppliers or other entities involved in aircraft manufacturing, whether that be rulemaking, regulatory changes, or requesting changes in the law?
Thank you, Chairman Graves. That's a great question. The SMS process is really the core technology for our safety system. So we have a rule now that rolls this out to manufacturers and Part 135 operators. Boeing has been voluntarily deploying an SMS system. One thing we've learned in this particular set of circumstances with the Alaska flight was that we need to make sure those SMS systems are talking to each other, and we need to make sure we're getting all the data that we can from those systems and have the tools to analyze those. To your specific question, the rule that is out there covers manufacturers. It doesn't necessarily cover all the component part manufacturers, but an OEM has the ability to impose those terms by contract, and we would expect that as part of their safety management system, they would insist on those types of controls with particularly key suppliers like Spirit Aerospace.
We passed laws to say that they had to do a study on seat size and on evacuation. And what they did on evacuation was embarrassingly poor and didn't have a model of what an aircraft looks like in the passengers. It had nobody over, I think, 60 years of age and nobody under 7 or 8 or whatever. And they claimed that was for liability purposes. Well, you know, that's hooey. And they also didn't have any dogs on there and any packages or people with disabilities, et cetera, et cetera. There were 26,000 comments in response to that SEAT Act that the FAA requested public comments out of 26,000 comments. Considering the request closed in November 1 of 2022, what can we expect the FAA, when can we expect the FAA to issue a final rule on the issue of seat dimensions?
So I'm familiar with the work that's gone on around that and those comments. I think it's important for us to make the distinction between what might be economic regulation and what's a safety regulation. So a lot of the comments focused on more, I want more legroom type of comments versus safety provisions, but we're taking all those comments into account. Typically with evacuations, the the problems tend to be piling up at the exits rather than getting out of the seats. So we've had trouble identifying issues around difficulty with seats. It's more tends to be piling up on the exits. But all that information has been considered, and we'll certainly take your feedback as well, sir.
I will tell you, I've seen a disturbing trend in cities choosing to use their airports, such as Chicago, O'Hare, Midway, Boston's Logan's, as facilities to house illegal foreign nationals brought here by the administration's, well, I'm going to say failure to enforce the immigration laws on the books. And that clearly falls, in my mind, into the category of non-aeronautical use. Now, my question to you is, has the FAA approved any request to use airports to house illegal foreign nationals?
So to your explanation, the FAA does have a role in
I know it does, but I'm just asking if you've approved, you're the administrator, has the FAA approved any requests to house illegal foreign nationals?
So I'm going to answer that if you'll let me.
Okay.
My understanding is
I just want to use the time efficiently here.
yeah. So the FAA does approve requests for community use, whatever the category. There's a huge number of categories for community use, and our criteria is whether it interrupts aeronautical uses or is otherwise disruptive.
So how
Whether
many
there's a loss of
requests have been approved for housing illegal foreign nationals?
My understanding is there's been one airport that has made that request. And
So the others that I mentioned, well, was the one that made the request any of the ones that I mentioned?
I believe it was either Kennedy or O'Hare. I can't remember for sure.
Okay, so it could be O'Hare, but then it wouldn't be Midway or Logan, yet they're housing illegal foreign nationals at the airport. Did the FAA make the required determination that no aeronautical demand is likely to exist? This is an airport, and I'm reading right from your regulation here, Chapter 22.6. Did the FAA make that determination?
The determination was that it did not interfere with aeronautical uses.
So in that case, I guess the FAA won't enforce its grant assurances, which it says right here, literally on number 1, these assurances shall be complied with in performance of grant agreements for airport development, airport planning, noise compatibility program, grants for airport sponsors. So the federal government's paying for it. They make the agreement, agree to it, and then don't follow it, and the FAA is not going to do anything about it. I want to yield some time to a friend, but let me just ask this question. How does walling off portions of the airport to house unvetted illegal foreign nationals, which passengers in America have to walk beside, these are unvetted illegal foreign nationals, how does that promote safety or utility or efficiency in these airports?
I think you're out of my area of expertise. I'm not familiar with that circumstance.
I think that answers the question. I'm going to yield some time to my good friend from Texas, Mr. Nels.
Can you give us a range of the numbers of people that you've deployed into the Boeing and Spirit facilities?
I think we have about 2 dozen at Boeing and maybe a half a dozen at Spirit.
Yeah. And can you give an indication of whether you think that'll be permanent? Is this going to be short-term? How long does this last? Is it part of what you need to be doing as part of a permanent solution?
So we're undertaking a 6-week audit. So we're in the middle of that now. And that audit will give us guidance on where we need to go. I think we're also going to look at this culture survey that's due at the end of the month and then make a determination of how many folks we need on the ground in both places.
My question is, I want you to bring us up to speed on what the FAA has done since November to implement a new enhanced CTI program. What's being done?
So we've done what we're trying to do is make sure that these schools are duplicating the curriculum that we teach at the academy. So we've put some definition around what that curriculum is and also looking at what physical tools they need. So flight simulators, tower simulators, things of that nature.
Can you, in a couple sentences, explain how the agency determines the frequency of these inspections and what impact these inspections have on production?
Thank you, sir. The agency uses a risk model with respect to manufacturers. It's a fairly uniform survey to identify the level of risk, and so how many inspections would be driven by that. That model will likely evolve based on the rollout of SMS systems, which should reduce risk and give us better insight into what's happening. And also in the case of Boeing, based on the culture survey that we expect to receive later this month.
Mr. Perry read to you from the manual about how a non-aeronautical purpose at an airport has to be approved by the FAA, and you stated that only one airport had approval to be used for the non-aeronautical purpose of housing migrants. Would you like to correct that answer, or is that the answer you want to stick by?
To my knowledge, and this is not an issue that I've only been there 3 months, not an issue I've spent much time on, but to my knowledge, there was only one application.
So do you think these airports are in violation of any federal law, or do you think they found a way around that?
I assume they're in compliance. I have not heard otherwise, but our role is to make sure that the proper procedures are followed.
Did you write that letter?
Did I write the letter?
Yes, sir.
No, it was drafted for me.
It was drafted for you. Who drafted it for you?
I don't know. It went through a process as this issue was developed internally to respond to requests for technical assistance on various issues with the reauth bill.
Is this letter the official position of the FAA to oppose the raising the mandatory retirement age without a study beforehand?
The official position is that we don't have a position on the retirement age, but if it changes, we'd like to have data to support the change.
Okay, so I want to be clear. So for everybody listening, the FAA, the administrator, does not have an official position on whether Congress, we passed it in the House, should raise the mandatory retirement age from 65 to 67.
Our role has been to identify issues around that, and we have identified two. One about international compliance, and then one about understanding the data of changing the age from 65 to 67.
Okay. Did ALPA influence your decision to write this letter? Did ALPA have any influence in the drafting of this letter, yes or no?
Not that I'm aware of.
How many positions are there at the FAA?
How many positions? Well, we have 45,000 employees.
45. And what percentage of those positions are filled?
I don't have an exact position number for you.
Is the COVID emergency over?
I believe so, yes.
Yeah, May 11th, President Biden declared the emergency over. I understand you use a hybrid telework model. Is that correct?
It depends on the function. So obviously our controllers are all on the job, but other employees are still in a hybrid situation.
How many days a week do the employees have to show up in a 2-week work period?
The policy, again, it depends on the employee, but and the job description, but the baseline is 4 days.
Yeah, so 4 days, your employees have to, in a 2-week period, show up 4 days. What if our air traffic controllers only showed up 4 days in their work week? Would it affect commercial, general aviation?
Well, as I mentioned, they show up every day for their jobs.
I understand that. What I'm trying to get at is, what if our controllers just showed up 4 out of a 2-week work period, 4 days? Would that interrupt our work?
Well, they can't control traffic from home.
I understand that.
Certainly would.
You know what I'm getting at. If they only showed up, would it be a problem for our airports and general aviation, commercial aviation across our country? Yes or no?
Of course.
How do you track employee accessibility and productivity in this hybrid model?
It's up to individual managers to manage their workforce to meet the needs of their mission.
I can just tell you from what I'm hearing from stakeholders is that accessibility to FAA staff is limited. And it seems evident that productivity is waning as several high-profile rulemakings are still ongoing. And you know this.
How did the FAA, in your understanding, fail to detect such a defect during the certification of the MAX 8 and MAX 9 aircraft?
So my understanding on that particular issue is that potential defect was discovered using computer modeling some years after the original certification of the aircraft, and modeling that was required by the AXA legislation, actually. But that's my understanding of how that was discovered.
Are you concerned by the trajectory of Boeing as an American institution? An American institution. Are you concerned?
My concern is that Boeing makes safe aircraft, so I'm less concerned about externalities. I'm more concerned about the quality of the aircraft coming off the line, and that's our
Well,
focus.
I would maintain it's part and parcel. They have a job to worry about safety, efficiency, and when you're worried about all these other issues and not the green economy and everything else, that should be your job number one.
Can you provide an update on FAA's implementation of the recommendations of the 2023 FAA Alaska Aviation Safety Initiative Tiger Team, including the 8 automated weather observing systems installations scheduled to have been completed in September of 2023?
Thank you, ma'am. So I'm fully supportive of the unique nature of Alaska and the role of general aviation in that. I had a chance to visit when I was deputy and got to tour quite a bit of some of the remote facilities, and I think the FAST program has really been a very strong program, and we support that, and we'll continue to support that. On the AWAS, I know that I got briefed on this ahead of the hearing, and I understand that 7 of the 8 have been deployed. The 8th is inaccessible due to some flooding or some other climate conditions, so we will make sure that continues as well.
What strategies are you implementing to bolster other fields in the aviation force, such as aircraft mechanics, pilots, other segments of the industry?
No, that's a great question, and I'm remiss for not mentioning that we're actually hiring in all these sectors. The controllers are sort of the most immediate safety need for us, but we're hiring in all sectors, and we're competing with all those other industries you just mentioned in a market that is a pretty good market if you're an employee. So I've often said I'm the chief recruiting officer for the agency, so we're doing direct outreach to schools. We're trying to cast as broad a net as we can to interest people into coming into the FAA, and maybe they come in for 30 years or maybe just 3 years. So we want to make it easier for folks to come through and have an experience there and then maybe go do something else afterwards.
The agency found inspections of the grounded 737-9 MAX aircraft showed Boeing's quality system issues were, and I quote, unacceptable and required further scrutiny. Do you have confidence in your suppliers that they can kind of maintain this quality control? It's not a fox guarding the hen house kind of situation?
Well, I think we're going to look at this process really top to bottom to see where the incentives are, where the failures are in the system, and we're going to demand that quality come up to the appropriate schedule. We certify aircraft to be built to very specific specifications, and they have to be built to those specifications. So regardless of their other motives, they're not going to be able to build more airplanes until they meet those standards.
Explain the impact of the delayed FAA reauthorization to Salt Lake City International and airports like that are going through modernization.
Well, yes, I think you're hitting on a very important point. These projects have a certain momentum, and they need to be funded, and they need to operate under current authorization. So I think it's vital that both of those pieces happen.
Can I ask you who asked you to write this letter dated February 5th?
So I think the discussion probably would have been with our government affairs team that focuses on providing technical assistance on legislation.
But you couldn't specifically, somebody come up to you and said, hey, Mr. Administrator, I'm drafting this letter. I want you to approve this letter so we can send out to Senators Cantwell and Cruz?
No, it comes through a correspondence. We put out a lot of correspondence, and the last 4 weeks I've been mostly busy on other topics.
Okay, so it was written by, your opinion, some government affairs team within the FAA?
Presumably, but I don't know precisely, but that normally would be how it would be developed.
All right, fair enough, fair enough. You did state that, I bring this letter up, and you stated that it is not the official position of the FAA to oppose raising the retirement age to 67, but you have some concerns, and in the letter it talks about we always prioritize a robust process to identify risk and ensure mitigations to maintain safety, but we do not test in a live environment. We do not test in a live environment. Could you tell us what that means? The members up here, what the hell's a live environment? Explain that to me.
I think I believe what that means is we don't change a rule to see how it plays out. We usually like to do the research before we change a rule.
Okay. Would you consider, are you familiar with Basic Med? Basic Med, the study, the Basic Med safety study? All right. The FAA authorized it. They let it run. They looked at it after 3 years, like 2017, 2018, 2019, and they reported back to Congress. It's right here. I have it here. An FAA report submitted to Congress, as required, on March 10th, reviewed 3 years of general aviation data and concluded that the basic med program is safe. Isn't that a live study? I mean, they were flying around. These general aviators are flying around. They're looking at whether it's a third-class medical versus a basic med, and they found out that basic med works. That is a live study. Would you agree?
Yeah, that was based on a legislative mandate.
Yeah, but I know it's a legislative mandate.
We don't refuse.
That is a live study, though. I mean, come on. How could you not agree with that? They're flying around, and they're reporting back 3 years of data, and they're saying, hey, there's no issues with basic med. That's a live study.
Right.
Okay. Just want to get that, because it says we do not test in a live environment. That's not true.
Prior to the Alaska Airlines 1282 accident, did the FAA find any evidence of persistent quality control lapses in any of Boeing's production lines?
So recognizing that to answer that question, a lot of that is before my tenure, but I think the production problems with the 787 beginning in 2019 through recently are pretty well known. And even just in December, we had an airworthiness directive around a loose bolt on a rudder system. So I think there were already some recent reports of production issues with Boeing.
Last week, through my work on Education and Workforce Committee, the Flight Education Access Act was included in major student loan reform package. This is a huge step in resolving that shortage. The common sense proposal closes the pilot workforce gap by letting prospective pilots access the same loan opportunities available to students at traditional four-year schools. It increases the total maximum amount of the federal direct and subsidized Stafford loans an eligible dependent may borrow to $11,000, increases the maximum amount for independent students to $137,500, and increases the maximum amount of federal direct Stafford loans to a total of $65,000. Mr. Administrator, if prospective pilots could access these types of student loans and use them when completing the FAA's regulated training, would that help improve the pilot shortage?
I think that would be a very useful initiative. It is very expensive to become an airline pilot, which means 1,500 hours. So you can become a private pilot with as few as 40 hours. So getting from 40 to 1,500 is a hugely expensive endeavor. So it's like any other profession, doctor, lawyer, plumber. It costs money to get there, and so
you would agree it's a positive outcome.
Absolutely.
This would be a positive initiative to
Absolutely.
move forward. So I will yield my time then to my colleague, Mr. Nels, the remaining time.
Thank you very much. Mr. Administrator, obviously this letter that you did not write, but you had the government affairs team write, I believe. And listen, you're a busy man. I don't think maybe you proofread this thing very clearly. I mean, there's some issues here as it relates to but we do not test in a live environment. I believe that basic med safety study is a prime example, and I have a few more, I believe. It's interesting. ALPA is taking dues from pilots in Canada over the age of 65. ALPA is taking dues from pilots over the age of 65, and we know ALPA they want to squash this. They don't want this retirement age raised. WestJet is flying ALPA-represented pilots over the age of 65 right now. That is your live study, Mr. Administrator. That is your live study. Let's talk about the Part 135 operators. We allow pilots to fly over the age of 65 under Part 135. Is that not a live environment? Could you explain to everybody up here what a Part 135 is versus a 121?
A Part 135 carries a carrier typically under 30 passengers.
Sure.
Or less, yeah.
NetJets would be an example?
That's correct.
All right. Do Part 121 and 135 share the same airspace?
They do.
They do. So they taxi with Part 121, i.e. the big airliners, folks, Delta, United, everything, and you can get this NetJet. Taylor Swift flying to the Super Bowl in her supersonic jet. They could be in the same airspace, taxiing on the same runway. Why do Part 135 that flies around the millionaires and the billionaires across the country, why can they fly to the age 67 but United and Delta, that gentleman, we fire him at 65. How does that make any sense?
Congress passed a law limiting them to 65?
Congress passed a law limiting them to 65.
Right.
And how do you feel about that? Do you think that's just, it's right?
I think it's what Congress did, so we don't second guess Congress. Well, I think our point was if you're going to change it, we'd like to have some data around that.
I think that's perfect. I yield back.
Thank you, Sheriff. For the record, I'm not sure that Taylor Swift flies supersonic. Just want to make note. Gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Auchincloss, recognized.
Not you, but the FAA took back airworthiness ticketing from Boeing. What did that do for oversight of Boeing then, and was that oversight sufficient given the problems it has had at factories regarding the MAX 9?
So I wasn't there at the time, as you noted. I guess I would say in retrospect, and given what happened with the plug door, it's hard to call that oversight sufficient. So we're looking at that process.
Once that notice is published, are you able to commit to publishing a final rule within 12 months of the notice of proposed rulemaking?
I can commit to keeping the rule moving as quickly as possible. It depends on what comments come in, how they get arbitrated, and then it has to go through a review process, as you know, up through OIRA. But we will give as much transparency as possible and try to keep that moving as much as possible. I think it's an important rule, and we want to get it out.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Nels.
Thank you, sir.
Sheriff Nels.
So we've talked about this letter. We've talked about the fact that I don't believe it was proofread, sir. I really don't. You seem to be a great guy. I think you have a bright future, but this letter is full of inaccuracies. It has flaws. It says we don't test in a live environment, but I don't believe you believe that. I just think that's not what you believe, and I think we can point that out. The last sentence of the letter, it says, quote, "It is critical to provide the agency an opportunity to conduct research and determine mitigations." You talk about conducting research. Everybody that's listening, watching, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, our friends to the north, Canada, all have pilots above the age of 67. They've had no safety issues. Zero, no safety issues. The head of the FAA in New Zealand, I went up to ICAO. I flew up to Canada, went to the ICAO meeting. The FAA Administrator of New Zealand said they have pilots flying up to the age of 75, and they have no issues. That's your live study, sir. Call them. Ask them. I even got, believe it or not, John Prater, the former president of Airline Pilots Association. It says, in the past, reference 60 to 65, in the past, commercial airline pilots who did not want to stop working at age 60 took jobs with international airlines or charter operators for which the retirement age was higher. The experience of these pilots should also be studied, said John Prater, president of ALPA. Quote, "You can look globally, look at Canada, and look at pilots flying in corporate aviation and on-demand services like NetJets." He says, referring to a large private aviation. The GAO could expand and ask the airlines themselves. That's the avenue they could investigate if they choose to expand their look, end quote. I yield.
In order to have a truly safe system, it seems to me that we can't rely on the manufacturers themselves to be their own watchdogs. Is that something you would agree with?
I certainly agree that the current system is not working because it's not delivering safe aircraft. So we have to make some changes to that. And I think we also have to look at the culture. To your point, incentives drive behavior, and I think maybe we need to look at the incentives to make sure safety is getting the appropriate first rung of consideration that it deserves.
Yeah, I mean, I played in the NFL, and if they'd let us be our own referees, you know, every time an offensive lineman tried to block me, it would have been a holding call. You know what I'm saying? So I think this is certainly something we should work on.
I'm certainly interested, as in others, in hearing your insights and hearing what stage of development the SFAR is in.
So that rule is under development, and we do expect a final rule by the end of the year.
And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield the balance of my time to Mr. Nels.
Thank you again, sir. In the letter again, it is critical to provide the agency an opportunity to conduct research and determine mitigations. We talk about the research. I mentioned to you, sir, and thank you for being here, I mentioned you Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. They are all operating with pilots over the age of 67. Do you think it would be a good idea to maybe reach out to those countries and ask them, hey, how's it working for you? Canada to the north, I mean, any issues with this? I mean, we're all human beings. Any issues? Do you think that would be maybe a good idea to try to help accomplish what you asked for in this letter, to conduct research and determine mitigations?
Certainly, if the legislation is passed, we will look at that option.
Yes, I think it's very, very important because it's all there for you. I talk a little bit about the 135s, right? These Part 135 operators that are flying the millionaires and billionaires. A lot of people can't fly that in this room here. They're flying around the millionaires and the billionaires, and those pilots can be 67 years old. And the FAA is okay with that, correct? I mean, they can fly 67 years old and fly the millionaires and billionaires in the same airspace. And Brosi argued with me on that one. The ALPA president said, oh, no, they don't operate in the same. He's not being truthful. They fly in the same airspace. You would agree with that?
Do I agree that they fly in the same airspace?
Yes.
They do, yes.
So how can we allow pilots to be 67 to fly the millionaires and the billionaires, but not allow Delta, United, and American to do it when we know we have a pilot shortage?
We don't set these age limits. The Congress does that.
I know it. We're going to fix it. We're going to fix it today.
Last week, we learned again about Spirit Aerospace, and they incorrectly drilled holes in the fuselage. I'm wondering if you know at this point in time, has FAA determined how many aircraft were delivered to customers with these problems, and what actions are being taken to address this newest problem with Boeing and its supplier?
So we're working with Boeing to understand what happened here, and so we're investigating that piece of it. These are small rivets that hold a window in place. So likely what that means is we know it's not to compliance, so we want to understand why it has not been manufactured per design, and then we'll see what corrective actions need to be taken to repair the windows and when that has to happen.
I'm talking about incorrectly drilled in the fuselage, that they had drilled holes that were too close to the edge.
Yeah, those were around a window holding.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, in the fuselage.
Okay, very good, very good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
You didn't want to yield your time to the gentleman from Texas?
I thought about it, but I thought I would pass.
How is the FAA addressing workforce challenges, particularly in terms of acquiring and maintaining the expertise necessary for certifying new technologies, such as unmanned aircraft systems and advancing air mobility technology?
So these new technologies do present challenges for us on the certification side. There are a lot of new systems, a lot of new capabilities that are new to aviation. So bringing in the right workforce to work those issues is an ongoing challenge. We're competing with all these companies out there that are developing those technologies, but we're working to make sure we have those resources in place. So.
And with that, I will yield the remainder of my time to Mr. Nels from Texas.
Thank you, sir. In your early testimony, you talked about you established I think it was an independent safety review team for the Boeing situation. Is that correct? To look at Boeing?
There was an independent safety review team established last year before I came in response to near misses.
Sure.
And they put out a report in November.
Mm-hmm. And I'm all about safety. I know you are. Everybody in America wants to have. We got the greatest aviation. I mean, our reputation is rock solid. We are safe. We have done a very good job in this country as it relates to aviation safety. Could you consider asking a group like that to go review some of the records from Japan, New Zealand, Canada, to look at it? I mean, it's a safety review team. Get the records. Ask them, hey, tell us a little bit about your history over here and your programs and having these pilots at 67 flying around up to 70. How's it working out? Don't you think that would be very useful information, not only for Congress here, but for the FAA, the administrator specifically?
If that legislation does raise the age, we will certainly look at all the tools available.
Absolutely, and I think that's fantastic. Even with the Part 135s. I mean, are you aware of any issues related to Part 135s? I mean, has your office received phone calls about potential issues related to all the 135 operators that are flying right now while we're having this conversation? You get all the data, don't you? I mean, are you a receptacle of a lot of the complaints and the data safety regulations as it relates to Part 135?
We would certainly look at that data as part of that.
Do you feel that, I mean, are you aware of any issues with these pilots flying around in the same airspace as Delta at age 67 with the Part 135s?
I have not looked at the data to see if there are any issues around that.
I think, I yield back.
Take a moment of personal privilege here. Stafford to my right keeps screwing up this list. I've had enough of this, and so we're going to go ahead and fire him. Seriously, to my right is Chris Sen, who has served in our military, got a master's in aviation and new interest in the market, has a law degree, and has been an incredible asset to this committee as we've gone through and built this near-perfect aviation bill. I think this is going to be the last subcommittee action this week, and I just want to take a minute. He's going to be taking off at the beginning of next month, and I just want to thank him for his dedicated service working in a bipartisan manner with the entire aviation team. And I'll say it again, has just been a tremendous asset to the committee, and really do appreciate his service. So.
How do you maintain a safety culture or return to that safety culture that we used to have and I think we've lost, and we're one disaster away from the industry imploding?
Thank you for the question. I think you've hit on some really true points. I have been reemphasizing since I've been at the agency that we can't rest on our laurels. We have to be ever vigilant to look for risks in the system, and that's been the focus for the past 3 months. And safety, culture and safety is really important, and it's one of the things we're going to be looking at with Boeing. We've got a safety culture review that was commissioned as part of the CERT reform legislation that's going to be complete later this month, and I think that will be informative. But at the end of the day, the goal is to make safe airplanes, and I don't think if you don't have that safety culture, I think it's hard to make safe airplanes. So we're going to be very focused on the quality process, and really looking at wherever the data takes us as we do this audit. We have to get back to a culture where safety is first. I don't care what's second, but safety has to be first, and that's where we need to get.
I took a visit to JFK Airport just days after this site was apparently approved. I coordinated with Mayor Adams' office. I coordinated with the Port Authority, TSA, and I spent a career in the NYPD as a detective. And one of the most startling things that I found when I got to JFK Airport was not the fact that the FAA or the City of New York actually had me go all the way to JFK Airport only to tell me that the meeting was canceled and they were not going to allow me to tour the facility. But the biggest concern that I have is that there is zero communication amongst agencies at that airport. Nobody knows who's in there. Nobody knows what's going on. I mean, it is a transportation hub, probably one of the largest in the country, and we have people just wandering the streets coming out of this facility. I'm not sure how anyone thought that this was a good idea. Has the FAA received or granted any request from an airport or a local, state, or federal agency between January 20th, 2021 and today to temporarily use a facility for purposes of hosting a migrant shelter?
I don't have direct information. I'm happy to respond after with a response to that.
To what extent has DHS consulted with the FAA about the appropriateness of proposing to house migrants at airports?
I don't have any direct information about that.
If DHS has consulted with the FAA, what has been the FAA's response?
Again, I have no direct information on this.
Committee staff asked in a follow-up email if the FAA could provide a detailed description of any analysis or assessment of the DHS housing plan or any other instance of airport migrant housing that has been conducted by the FAA in accordance with the FAA's safety risk management policy. The decision to approve housing of migrants poses a serious security threat and represents failure of the Biden administration's disastrous border policies. Does the FAA have a plan in place to ensure that any of these sites, even the ones that perhaps you don't know about yet, will no longer be used to house migrants?
I don't have any information about that.
So you're the administrator of the FAA, and you don't have any information on any FAA locations that have housed migrants or could potentially house migrants?
To my knowledge, there are no FAA locations that house migrants.
To your knowledge, are there any FAA locations that were approved to house migrants?
I mean, I don't consider an airport an FAA location. Maybe you're talking about airports?
The FAA has to approve in order for them to become migrant shelters.
We approve community use agreements, yes.
Okay. And at no point did the FAA think that perhaps it was a bad idea to house migrants in these locations?
I don't have any information on what FAA was thinking before I got there.
Okay. So when did you take reins as administrator?
End of October.
End of October. Okay. So on November 6, 2023 was when the letter was sent. It's now February 6, 2024. We still haven't received a response. Will you commit today in front of this committee that in 1 month you will respond to the questions that were asked in this letter?
1 month from today, I will, yes.
From 1 month today. So by March 6th of 2024, we will have an answer to all of the questions?
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And what can the FAA do to address persistent and burdensome helicopter noise?
So I think the most effective tool that we have found is community meetings sponsored by a government entity, usually an airport, that are open and inclusive, so include not only the immediate affected areas, but also areas surrounding that, so that there's an ability to have a community dialogue around solutions.
I might not be articulating this exactly correctly, but a pilot explained to me that when pilots have to leave for health reasons and then that health reason is overcome and then they try to get back into the system, that there's not enough people or that process is also being delayed and has a long lead time. And I think that's particularly problematic given the chronic shortage of pilots. Is he correct in that, and is there anything you can do about that?
He is correct in that. I've had 2 flight instructors who both went through that, and they both complained to me about how long it took. So we're trying to move that approach. It's not unrelated to the mental health arc that we've stood up, just trying to make the system clearer and be able to get to decisions more quickly. So that's something we're looking at as well.
We used to see these notices at the airport that said you need to have a real ID to fly come a certain date, and that date kept getting pushed back. And now I don't see the signs at all. Are we going to have a real ID or that has the new and improved driver's license, if you will, in order to fly anytime soon?
That would typically be regulated by TSA, so I'm not really familiar with that issue.
The FAA owns this tower, and the community cannot replace it until the FAA says so. Can you speak a little bit to the importance of infrastructure in ensuring safety around the country?
So I can. Infrastructure is a huge challenge. We have a lot of it at FAA, and a lot of it is really beyond its useful life, including, for example, all of the high altitude control centers that are designed for no more than 50 years of service, and they're pushing 60 at this point. The funding for that has been a challenge over time, and maintenance falls behind. So I can certainly look into that particular instance that you've cited, but it is a problem throughout the NAS.
And I would just caution you, it seems like we've made a move to get away from hiring people on qualifications and hiring them on classifications.
So I can assure you that we hire everybody on qualifications. And I can also tell you that we have just recently put in changes to be much more flexible in how we hire out of the military, because we're able to hire from the military and put them directly into facilities. So that's one area that we're really trying to open the pipeline on.
What, if any, steps is the FAA taking to reduce airplane and helicopter noise over populated areas like the District of Columbia?
What I can say is in the past several years, they've made some improvements in that area. They've hired specific folks who are focused on community engagement. And in situations where airspace is being redesigned or where there are persistent noise issues, they'll engage with organizations to have community meetings and understand the views of the citizens and see if there are actually real-time changes that can happen in the airspace to try to mitigate.
We certainly haven't heard it yet. It hasn't been felt here yet.
Yeah, I don't know the specifics of DC. I know that we're on a fairly tight footprint and the approach paths are fairly limited by the restricted airspace, so there probably aren't a lot of options beyond the north-south arrival and departure for DCA. So that may be a limiter in this case.
The point is, I think about looking at your background, you're a former pilot, and I think you're 62 years old. You're 62 years old, right? And I think you have a 5-year term, 5 years. Do you think that we should give you a cognitive test when you turn 65? Before you finish your term, I do not believe that we should give you a test to make sure that you're all there. You got the cognitive. When you turn 65, I mean, we do it for the pilots. We do it. They get their EKGs, they get their physicals. I mean, that is a stringent process. We do it for them. Why shouldn't we do it for you?
So I think with respect to regulating airmen and the safety of the NAS, the medical certification is there to protect.
I agree.
So.
And you agree we have the safest aviation record the past 10 years. I mean, things are going very, very well, knowing that we passed legislation that allowed the Part 135s to fly to 67. We haven't had any issues. You have any issues right there with Part 135 right now? Any concerns with that safety record?
As I said earlier, I have not looked at that data.
I think, well, I'll help you. There is no problem there. There is no problem. You heard of Wheels Up? You know who that is? Delta's own little private version of their, right? I wonder how they would feel, the Delta's CEO, if you start raising concerns about their safety as it relates to Part 131. Dave in the audience, this guy right here, been at Delta for 30 years, former Air Force spy plane pilot. He's 63 and a half. America, we're going to fire this guy in 18 months. It's an arbitrary number. We just come up with it, 65. Let's just fire him. He goes through all the testing. He does it all, but we are going to fire this man because of that age. But yet, sir, you are out there touting a project to recruit retired, experienced military air traffic controllers, but an existing, fully qualified and not yet retired pilot is somehow unsatisfactory. Nobody in this hearing, my friend, I think Mr. Massey brought it up once, talked about retirement age today. Nobody brought it up because it passed this committee. It passed the House of Representatives overwhelmingly. And now it's over in the Senate. Alpa got beat over here. Ambrosi got beat. Now he's kind of through a train wreck and try to get you to confuse the other members in the Senate with this letter, making it sound like this isn't safe. All the data's there. The live environment testing's there. You can reach out to Japan, all these other countries. You know that we got pilots flying at 67, Part 135. It's all there. All the data is there. And ALPA, matter of fact, Ambrosi was served last night with a lawsuit. 2,500 ALPA union-paying members filed a lawsuit on Ambrosi for a breach of duty for fair representation. Shame on him. Let's get this done. And I think, sir, it is incumbent upon you to get some clarification as it relates to this letter before the Senate meets on Thursday. Would you be willing to do that for me? Look at this letter?
I'm sorry, I'd be willing to do
Would you be willing to look at this letter and look at this and try to say, hey, listen, there's some problems with this letter. It's not true.
I think I've clarified the intent of the letter.
Very good. I appreciate that. I yield back.
The committee stands adjourned.